I mean, you did say to me, your input on here, but I said that your input is just as important, especially as a bid writer over COVID. So I suppose you just say a little bit about what you do and, your input.
Thank you. But I'm kind of almost throwing away the script, okay? Not that I have a script, but so I guess, Venessa, you said to me when I first said I'd do this, send me your bio. And I was like, where do I start? Where am I coming in with this? And I guess because COVID was there, I thought, well, okay, so I'm a specialist bid writer for COVID bid writer for funding it's for a time anyway, whilst all this is going on, for voluntary and community groups and charities. Can I just check you can hear me properly?
We can hear you, but I know your bandwidth is slightly low. I think it's just a bit, your bandwidth.
Right. Oh, sorry. I've had to put you on my phone. I've had to do this on my phone, and it's not ideal because I couldn't get in through my laptop. But actually, I would say that there are some insights that I can share from that role. But actually, I think the reason I'm here is not really to do with that, because I've been sitting here and I'm a reflective person anyway. I'm an academic as well. And I'm sitting here and I'm thinking, why do I have to go so late in this now? Because I've listened to everybody. And look, whilst I've got this massive pad, right? And I've just been writing down, this connects with this and that connects with that. So if I just want to say really that the reason I do bid writing is because fundamentally I'm an activist, I guess, although people see that as a behind the scenes thing. I started out in youth work in the 1980s and I was a teenager myself, right? So I've always been quite live in terms of the issues that are going on. And actually, a lot of the issues that we talk about today are the same as they were back then. That's one of the things that I'd say. And I think that was something that Leroy was talking about as well, which really resonated. But I would say, so I did a doctoral research study about 10 years ago into collaborative working between the voluntary sector and the local authority. And it was mainly for organisations working with young people. And one of the things that I focused on was that kind of power dynamic between local authorities and the voluntary sector and grassroots organisations. And I think something that's come to my mind over the COVID periods of time is the need for the voluntary sector, community groups, and I guess some of the stuff that we've been talking about here around kind of the Black community in particular, the need for collaboration within. So we're expecting other people maybe to buy into something that maybe we're not always doing so well ourselves. So that's something that I hadn't really thought about before COVID that's really come up for me. So I think that one of the buzzwords for me around what we've been talking about is collaboration. But also this notion of, we haven't named it, but intersectionality. So maybe I think that people struggle sometimes with the different layers. So being Black, being autistic, having additional learning needs, whatever. And actually they are all they're all together and they all kind of manifest as one thing. And I think when it comes to, in particular, the criminal justice system, that's really where this plays out, the challenge for people within the justice system to be able to maybe reflect upon and respond to that intersectionality within people. So, I do have some personal experience of this, and I guess if I'm really honest, I guess the compulsion to be involved in stuff like this. And Venessa, when I first reached out to you, and I know Paul, I've reached out to you in a different way as well. So it's interesting how this has all come together. For me, has come from a kind of a personal perspective of the criminal justice system, autism, and the vulnerability within young adults in particular. And I think that it's an invisible space because, and as a bid writer, I know this, that a lot of the attention is given to kind of young people, those under 18. Lots of money is kind of given into that space as well. But actually, there's a whole space of particularly vulnerable young adults who have additional needs or autism or whatever, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed, that are actually just like lambs to slaughter in this situation. And I think for all sorts of reasons as well. And I think for me, there's a lot around maybe redefining what we mean by vulnerability, because I think earlier on, Paul was talking about kind of helping young people to become more savvy. And I think that one of the things that is an issue is that you can have a young person, a young adult who is savvy and presents as savvy. And that's one of the issues if they become involved in the criminal justice system, is that then they're not seen as vulnerable. And I did a presentation and I went as me. I said, look, I'm not going in as an academic. It was at university, it was last year, and it was around sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation and county lines. And I said to the participants, look, I've come here as me, no hat. And I kind of feel a little bit like that tonight, because there was a bit of which hat am I wearing? There's so many that I could wear. I keep looking at this just because I'm trying to draw it all together. There's so many that I'm wearing really. But when I did that presentation, one of the things that I was kind of reflecting on is the way that young people, young adults, those with autism and in my situation, cognitive processing learning difficulties as well, kind of present in a particular way that they're exceptional at mimicry, exceptional. I kind of, if I'd have been able to show this on my laptop, I'd have shared parts of the presentation that I gave, because it's so relevant to this. Often misunderstand, often misunderstood, struggle with change, prefer routine, can be blunt, verging on rude, but can also appear sociable in familiar surroundings. Now, I'm basing this on my own personal experience and not on academic research, although I've just applied. I'm going back to do a PhD in this subject. I've decided it's time to kind of draw this together. So some of you might hear from me again, just because I'm like blown away from everything that's been spoken about. The fact that these young people, young adults, may struggle with decision making, and that may mean that they make snap decisions, wrong decisions in the moment that have indelible impact on their lives, and particularly on when we're talking about things like county lines, because it's drugs and it's often class A drugs. Most of the time, autism or not, they're incarcerated, and they're incarcerated for a time as well. They do proper time for this, even though actually what it might have been is just kind of like not quite knowing what to do in a situation and not quite knowing how to respond in a situation. So I'm kind of very aware of the way that this manifests. It interests me that we focus quite a bit on the police, and I just think this is kind of just one part of the system. I think that the education system to prison pipeline is very real, and it's very subtle as well, not necessarily in relation to pupil referral units and kind of young people that are identified as having educational additional needs. In my situation, those needs weren't shared at all. So therefore, there wasn't an awareness of the needs. So therefore, there wasn't an awareness of the need to kind of explore that further. But we're also talking about the way that young people, young adults, if they're young adults, they don't necessarily have an appropriate adult with them. So therefore, when they're interviewed and they misunderstand maybe the way that things are phrased, that they're then told, well, you should know this. You're an intelligent person. You're doing well at school, or you're doing well at college, or whatever. But right the way through to barristers, and I think there's a need for kind of specialisms around the lawyers that represent within the criminal justice system, who writes the pre-sentence report and how that's phrased and how that's kind of understood and interpreted. And fundamentally, really, I guess, because that's the crux place in the courtroom, that, our judges are aware. I know of a situation where, the judge kind of found it difficult to comprehend positive references from 30 people with the fact that a young adult had autism, and kind of said, you need to choose. You can't be that person and that person. What is that about? Now, because I lecture in things like equality and diversity, equality and social justice, professional identity, I'm kind of aware that fundamentally that's discriminatory. Like, of course, those things can marry. But again, I kind of see that as people's difficulty with intersectionality, difficulty with grey, which I'm kind of quite comfortable with grey. I'm quite comfortable with things that I call like hybridity, so the hybrid between different things. I was really warmed by Brandon, what you were saying, because you're absolutely right. And Paul, you mentioned, it's about communication. And when I teach, when I lecture in this, I'm saying fundamentally this is about perception, it's about communication. I also lecture in professional identity and the professional cloak, and that's really what you were talking about there, Brandon. What we need underneath is somebody that cares, somebody that wants to understand. And if people don't want to understand, actually they can sit in a training room and be thinking about what they're going to have for tea that evening and not really hear what's being said and not let it resonate with them. And I think there's something really fundamental about somebody wanting and accepting this, really, and receiving this. So I think it's about the whole system. The other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on, and again, as a bid writer, I write a lot about this, is the trauma-informed approach that's kind of become popular over the last couple of years or so. And I'm able to kind of procure funding on that basis that, professionals are taking a trauma-informed approach. Now, my master's is in therapeutic childcare, so I'm fully articulate with trauma and the impact of trauma and how we can respond to trauma. But what's interesting to me, and I think we've kind of touched on this, Leroy, you definitely was touching on this, is the whole thing when we're talking about accountability. For me, how far back are we going with that accountability? Because we're talking about trauma, generational trauma. We're not just talking about, so-and-so's seen this, or so-and-so's come from a particular country where they've seen that. We're talking about generational trauma that is being played out. And particularly, I guess, when we're talking about the Black community, I'm very clear of what's been inherited, the legacy that's been inherited, really, and how that plays out. And when you couple that with all the stuff that we're talking about here around autism, and protection, and why maybe it's not a good idea to portray deficit, I totally get that. As much as I know that it's important for young people and children to be diagnosed, to obtain their diagnosis so that they can then receive the support that they need. But often people don't realise that until it's too late, the benefit of that. So there's so many things that I could talk about. In terms of the bid writing, what that's exposed me to, because I'm working with grassroots organisations who are desperate to not go under. They're like, we're on our knees. Look, help us to get some funding in so that we can continue to do what we need to do for people. And, Mandy touched on the work that's been done by the voluntary sector. Absolutely agree with the whole socially distanced activities that have gone on throughout COVID, when most services have kind of literally locked down and stopped. They've continued on, and I've been kind of privy to that through my work. But also I've learned things that I just didn't know as Joe Public, where one organisation said, okay, so we were able to secure some services because we trawled through the COVID, is it the COVID Act? I think it's the COVID Act. We trawled through that and found a bit in there that said young people with autism are entitled to additional leisure time. So during lockdown, when everybody thought we have to be doing this and we have to be doing that, there was a condition written in where young people and children and families could obtain or be allowed to have additional leisure time outdoors to help with the condition of COVID and the condition of autism. I didn't know that. People that I speak to casually didn't know that. The only reason I know it is because I spoke to an organisation in my role as a bid writer that had found it of their own volition. and presented it to the local authority. And the local authority were then able to go, oh my gosh, yes, of course. So this is really interesting for me, how the community can rise up and kind of speak and utilise their power dynamics. So going back to what I said about my previous research, I guess what I think is that the power is in our hands, but we have to have the confidence and the articulation. And again, hats off to Venessa and Paul. I've been following you for a while, as you know, for speaking out. I didn't know that there was support for families. What I do know is that when you are a family member going through, particularly the criminal justice system, it's a challenge, it's traumatic, and unless you're extremely kind of assertive, persistent, resilient, and articulate, you can just kind of become sucked into the whole system yourself. So I'm kind of so pleased that there is support for families out there. I don't know how long I've been speaking. I'm on my soapbox a little bit. So I guess I don't know. I'm happy to answer any questions, and particularly obviously around the bid writing, if there are any orgs out there that are that are wanting to know what's available or whether I can help outside of this forum. Absolutely. I just want to say that I've reached out to organisations before now and said, I can help, I could help you. This is before I was doing this role. And it amazes me sometimes how people don't respond. There's many organisations that I know that I could have helped that just don't respond. I don't know what that is, but they don't. So I just want to share that as well, to say that sometimes we have to be willing to receive the help. And whenever I offer to help someone, it's coming from my heart. So I've seen, I've observed, and I'm looking, I'm thinking I could do something for them. So, I just want to kind of share that too.
Thank you, Joanna. What I'm going to do, I know I've been reading a lot of the chats, and maybe while I was just going to the panelists, I was asking if everybody's okay to stay. As I said, we're finishing at 9:30, but I know when we did the last one, which a lot of people are aware of, we did go slightly over time. So let Jackie say something, and then what we do, if anybody's willing to stay, because Tom said he's happy to do some Q&A, so please feel free to stay on. Because like I said, it was the reason why I did it this way is obviously where I know it's 3 hours behind between Jackie and Tom. So it shows why it's important. You know, it's about getting the USA to join us because, again, we're in nighttime. They're still in afternoon, I believe. So as I said, Jackie, I'll leave it to you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my name is Jackie Pilgrim, and I am here in several capacities. I'm here as a mom of a young adult who's diagnosed with severe autism and nonverbal. I here represent myself as a person who's been diagnosed with Asperger's disorder. Late, I was diagnosed at the age of 46. I also here in the capacity of an advocate. I work very closely with the CIT Leadership Collaborative. I work with Norman Durham, and the National Black Disability Coalition. How I got involved with CIT was first looking at my son who's getting older and thinking about him getting out more into the community, and was concerned about him having some sort of safety training, learning how to be able to deal with police officers and first responders, general training around the house and out in the community. And I was calling around looking for training, and at the time I could not find anything for him. But in the process of looking, I came across CIT and was invited to come to a consumer panel and said that I should go ahead and share my concerns there. So I took my son, and we did, and I was able to talk about my son and share the experience as to why I really want to get involved with training young adults and training police officers and how to interact with each other. My son developed epilepsy about 6 years ago. And when he had a really major episode, I had to call 911. And one of the things I believe in doing is making sure that people are well informed. So I went on the call, I made sure to tell them my son's age, his diagnosis, his demeanor, and all these kinds of things so they would know what they were coming into when they were coming into the home. And I reassured them that even though at that time he had not had any experience with EMS, that he was a very calm person, trusting person. And as long as I was in the room, they would have no problem dealing with him. So, excuse me, Hunter. So when they came, to my great surprise, as soon as they entered the home, one of them said, "Don't worry, we've been trained on how to deal with autism. This is something we know. We've got it. Everything's under control." And immediately I felt like, okay, great. I didn't have to explain everything. I could just be present, and I didn't have to worry about their interactions with Hunter, and he would understand it. So everything they asked of my son, he did. And as a matter of fact, he even exceeded their expectations, because when he had to go to the ambulance, he said, "Get up and let's go." And my son got up and walked out to the ambulance, no questions asked. You know, he just didn't have any issues. It was a very, very calm exchange. And my getting involved with the CIT was a chance for me to say thank you, number one, for what you do. Didn't know that you existed, but I'm so glad that you do. And I wanted to be involved. I didn't realize I was going to be as involved as I am, because now I actually have the opportunity to do the autism IDD training in Durham for them, which gives me an opportunity to talk about, I mean, we can talk about statistics and we can talk about science and all that, but I want to bring to them real life experience. And I talk to them about real life scenarios, and I talk to them about trauma. And that trauma is not always centered around something really bad happening like abuse, but the trauma of facing a world every day that you do not understand, a world that does not understand you, and you have to somehow manage this every day. And anything could set you off. And one of the scenarios that I often talk about is a young boy who attends school, and he had a rough day in school, and he comes home, and all he wants to do is have his favorite snack, which is cereal and milk. And he's getting the bowl, he's getting cereal and everything, and he picks up his fork, and his mom says, "No, you cannot have cereal with a fork. You have to eat your cereal with a spoon just like everyone else." And the young boy gets mad, and he throws the fork at his mother, and he bolts out the back door. Most of the times, you know, the officers will be like, "Well, why in the world would he get angry about that?" Yeah, everybody does eat their cereal with a spoon. But what most people don't think about is even people who are autistic and severely autistic, they have their own way of problem solving. So no one considered that this young man had choking issues with liquids when he was a little boy, and that he had a problem navigating breathing, chewing, and swallowing liquids all at the same time. So that he chose a fork because he discovered that he could have that wonderful taste of milk, he could deal with the cereal, and not have extra liquid in his mouth. And that was his way of problem solving, because he was afraid of being choked. So I say that to say this: when you're dealing with people with autism, it's not just about what you've read in books. It's not just about the statistics. There's real life happening every day that we're not talking about, because we're not having those conversations that we're having now. And that's why I have to take my hat off also again to Venessa. We have been friends for so long, and we've been there for each other. And the fact that she's even willing to take on, I mean, this came out as a suggestion, and she was really ready to take this on and create this conversation, which is so desperately needed. We need so much to talk more. And I wanted to also address Leroy, when he was talking about taking funding and resources and putting it back into the community. One of the things I have always done, especially since my son's diagnosis, and especially since my own as well, is make myself available. All of my friends and family know that we are autistic. I always say, if you know of someone who has a family member that's autistic, it doesn't matter if they're just finding out or if they're having any difficulties, give them my phone number. Let me talk to them. Let me try to offer support. I have done this over the years. And over the years, out of all the times I've given my phone number, I've only had 2 people contact me. So even when there's help in place, it's still difficult for them to cross that line, to feel comfortable, to be able to reach out and actually talk to someone and get help. And it's the same means within the police force and the rest. They're people just like everyone else. Autism is not something that's really talked about. And usually if it is talked about, it's talked about in terms of a deficit or statistics or something. But if you don't deal with it every day in your home, then you're really not going to know how to deal with it on the job. And it's important that if we want police to understand us better, then we as parents and individuals need to get more involved. And we need to seek out situations in organizations like CIT. We need to call around and see if there are other organizations that do training, or can you get involved with an organization and maybe develop a training, but we need to get involved. The accountability factor is real. And it's about, if you want to see change, then you need to be part of the change. We need to be willing to do the work. And it's a thankless job on some cases. You don't get paid for it. But in the end, it's worthwhile. Me taking my son to CIT events and to have him in front of CIT and giving them a chance to talk to him, get to know him, giving him a chance to get to know uniformed police officers and not being afraid, being comfortable around people in a uniform, feeling that he could trust them. They seeing that he's just an amazing person that he is, and that it's not as daunting to be able to talk to him or to interact with him as one might think. Sometimes we talk about the fact that autism is not something that has a particular look. If you see autism, it's because you're seeing a person's traits, and not all people have the same traits, so everyone's not going to present the same way. One of the things that we did, I had my son with me, and we talked about autism. We talked about the fact that you could see his traits at the time, but with something as simple as a hat and a pair of sunglasses, maybe a lollipop in his mouth, and he's just sitting in a chair. And I stepped back and I said, well, do you see disability now? And they couldn't see it. And so I want the police officers to think about that when you're approaching someone. If you're walking with a crutch or someone standing or sitting nearby and you talk to them and they don't answer right away, that it may not be defiance. It may be something else present. If you just slow down and just take a moment to observe the person, interact with the person, and get an idea if it seems like maybe there is a disability present, but just taking those extra moments and, instead of doing a snap decision, that could really change the situation and you can have a better outcome. Also, one of the things that I'm very proud about for us locally, but in the U.S., we have this wonderful program called National Night Out, and it's a national program. It happens every first Tuesday of August. This year, though, they're trying to schedule, because of COVID, so they're trying to schedule it back to the first Tuesday in October, so I'm hoping it will happen. And this is when police officers go out into the community in different areas of community all around, and they interact with people. They have fun, they have games, there are not conversations, people ask them questions. They get a chance to explore police cars, they get a chance to explore fire engines, all kinds of things. And it's a way of them kind of disarming themselves more or less in front of the community and showing that they're real people, that they are indeed here to protect and serve, and that they do want to know the people that they're serving, and they care deeply about us, and they want us to care about them. I mean, we have to thank these people and understand that not all police officers are bad. There are a lot of wonderful police officers that have to face the trauma of getting up every day, especially during times like this, and facing an angry community that they are sworn to protect and serve. And that they have families too, they have children, and it wears on them. And sometimes they don't feel like they have the support that they need. They may not feel comfortable going to talk to somebody. You know what I'm saying? Because that may get back to them and affect their job. So what we want to do is I want this conversation to promote thoughtfulness and empathy from both sides. It's not just about, us training them. It's about us learning about them. It's about us teaching our children, children learning how to interact with them, and how to be more responsible with their actions in the community. So one of the things I wanted to do that I'm so very proud to do today is that I have a written testimonial from another officer that he actually took the training, and it impacted him so much so that he actually wrote this letter to the administration. So if you don't mind, I want to read this letter to everyone today. It reads, "Gentlemen, I wanted to let you know that your CIT training is making a difference. I want to thank you for helping me see people in crisis in a different way. I want to share a story with you. Yesterday, I responded to the ambulance bay at Duke Hospital. Durham police had brought an 8-year-old boy from school. It was an emergency commitment. The child was visibly upset and refused to exit the back of the police car. Several people tried to coax him out with no avail. We knew this was going to be a long waiting game. Forcibly taking him out of the police car was not going to be an option. I watched several staff, security, and police try to talk to him using different tactics. But all he kept doing was crying out for his mother. Obviously, this was breaking everyone's heart. I wrecked my brain trying to figure out what I could do to break through to him. When I remembered what I learned in CIT and decided to think outside of the box. I hurried to the peds and found a nurse and asked if they had any toys available. Luckily, they had a plastic jar filled with little toys, including a red spinner. I brought the jar out and got on my knees and tried to get eye level with him. Instead of asking him to get out of the back seat, I started to show him the jar and all of the little toys inside. The red spinner caught his attention, and it seemed to provide him comfort. After slowly building rapport with him, we found a common ground when he told me that his favorite show was the Power Rangers. I told him that I would have a room just for him with a TV and that I could help him find Power Rangers cartoons. I watched him relax and slowly gain my trust. Inside, I was elated seeing the little guy starting to come around. The greatest feeling was watching that scared little boy finally walk out of the backseat of that police car on his own. He let me wheel him to a room. I'm proud of many things I've accomplished in my 20-year career. The awards and the accolades are nice. However, this call reminded me that sometimes the smallest victories can be the most rewarding. Officer Raphael Reynolds. I read this because not only does the CIT impact this officer and give him the tools that he needed to be able to effectively help someone who was in crisis in the community, but by him being so positive and by him meeting this little boy right where he was, he gave this little boy a chance to not be traumatized by police. He gave this child that if he does have a crisis sometime later, that when he sees police, that he may feel an air of trust and feel like he's going to be properly taken care of. I hope that this is something that we can increase over time, that we can build a trust between citizens and police officers. And I hope that we can communicate, that we can educate our communities, and that our communities will learn how to learn from each other, will learn how to have those discussions, and that we all can actually come to the table when need be and carry something back home with us that we can share with our neighbors. It's very important that we do this. That's why I hope to see more conversations like this. I hope Vanessa's willing to maybe we can plan something else in the very near future, aside from part 2 of this particular panel. But another thing that I want to also bring up is the importance of being able to be accepted as a person who's on the spectrum when you don't look like you're on the spectrum, and how difficult it is to go into the workplace or to deal with family members who do not believe that you are on the spectrum. And sometimes people will try to trigger you to see if they can make traits happen, or sometimes your traits do show, and then when they show, people dummy you down. I've experienced all of this. I've experienced this, in my private life, work, and everything. Sometimes I want to hide. Sometimes I feel like maybe I shouldn't have said anything. But there's a passion inside of me that says, you know what? No, it's not fair to us to have to hide. I should be a proud Black woman who's autistic. I should be able to say that and meet all and my needs be met just as much as everyone else's needs be met. I should be able to work comfortably. I should be able to advocate for myself and say what I need, and someone try to accommodate me. These things should be happening, and it should be second nature. And it should be happening for my son as well. As a matter of fact, my son will probably get assistance quicker because he's more severe. But for someone like myself, I just have to wing it. And the rate of suicide amongst people like me who are on the higher functioning end, for lack of a better word, I don't like saying that. the main thing that kills us is suicide. Suicide, heart attacks, and death from other conditions that go untreated, because we may not be able to convey that we feel better, that we feel sick, and doctors are not going to take the time to really look into it. So that on top of COVID makes it even more detrimental to us. If we're already feeling the pressure, what are we going to do now? So I try to reach out and talk to my peers and parents and kids, teenagers, and I try to give them tips and things that they can do that try to help to feel better, to be able to navigate times like this, to have a reason to get up in the day, to have things that you can do. My son has been here with me, God love him, for a few months. I don't know how he's able to fare it, but he's doing well. But one of the main things I do is just make sure that he has different activities around the house, and that we do have outings, and that he gets to interact with other people, even through Zoom. And he'll even come in from time to time and interact, as he saw you not too long ago. So being able to do that and check in and be aware of not just his autism, but his mental well-being, and see what it takes for him to feel mentally well and happy and stable and safe in a situation that's very different from what he knows. And I have to do the same thing for myself. One of the main things is, I always tell people, the brain differentiates the day by how much light we have, dark. So if you need to have more light, open your curtains, have more light in your house during the day. Have a time that you close your curtains at night. Have specific things that you do. If you're working from home, try not to work from your bed. You have to have a separate place for resting and create a space for working. Those things will give you a divide, and it feels your day and makes your day feel more complete. If you're sitting in the same room, doing everything in the same space, you kind of hit this lull, and then depression steps in. So those kinds of things are things that I like to talk about. But I'm just so very happy to be here. I think about in 2017, when I was given an opportunity to actually speak at the United Nations, I talked about CIT and the training that we were doing then. And one of the main questions asked was, do you think it really works? And now I can say firsthand, I said yes then, because I believe that it would, because I can't see any harm in training people and helping them to understand. But I have firsthand proof, positive, that this really works. And I have the good pleasure of being a very small part of this process. So I'm very thankful for that. And if anyone has any questions about that, and I also want to talk about a couple other things too. I don't know what it's like for you in London, but I know here in my local area, our MCOs are actually, they took time to reach out to families and individuals that have autism and intellectual disabilities. They were actually calling weekly for a while, and then bi-weekly, and now they're back to monthly, to check in to see how they're faring, if they needed additional services. I just got a call the other day where they partnered up with an organization called Mom's Kitchen. And this organization is actually supplying foods to people that have autism and intellectual disabilities, up to 2 weeks worth of food at a time. And they carry the food out to the home and make sure that people have enough food during this time. So things like that, if you can call around and check to see what might be available, contact the MCOs, or I don't know what it's called there, but contact the MCOs and see what resources are available. And again, it really pays to talk to your neighbors, to be able to talk to people in the community and share information. A lot of times there's a lot of information that's not in our community because, well, it is in our community. We don't know it because we're not talking about it. So that's what I have to say. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Jackie. I think the reason why I did put Jackie last, because Jackie's been doing lots of Zooms in the UK for some time now. So I felt put her at the end because everybody's got to know her. I mean, if you've never heard of her before, you've heard her now. So as I said, I know there's lots of people that have sort of stayed on. Those who didn't log in, I think a lot of people are texting me because there's sometimes some people struggle to log in. So I'm letting everybody know that this is going to be shared so that everyone can share it around. As I said, it's something that we have to talk about. Yes, I know some people may agree to disagree with what other people's views are. And I'm always trying to say that, like I've said, I used to say, and I'm being very honest, I got help from the white community. Jackie can vouch for me that in the beginning,
Yes.
So as time gone on, I use the word some black people, some black professionals, because as I said, if we stay in a certain community and all we see is pure negativity from one particular community, we start thinking we're on our own. So as I can say, as time's gone on, it's taken me 12 years to realise there are black Asian professionals out there, but again, they're not in the forefront. Mm-hmm. And again, just like autistic people, I know so many autistic people, their views are very different, but it's about me making sure that these platforms do continue. Yes, it may be thought-provoking, but it's better that we can talk about race, racism, discrimination, whichever way it is, so that our views can be heard from all different angles, right, and not sugarcoat it. So at least that way, when you go back to your organisations, your self-help groups, your family, dual heritage families as well, those who are married out of their race are experience a lot of discrimination. And I know that because I've had a lot of white mothers who have married outside their race, or you've got black mothers as well, black men who have married out their race, and they've gone through a lot of stigma. So it's not just about our voice, it's those who have married out of their race, because sometimes they're experiencing discrimination from their family members and their friends. So we have to be careful what we say, and be careful that just because we don't like something, it's not about us putting our views on other people. And that's how I've always been, because of what I went through with my son. It was very lonely. I'm always saying it was very lonely. I still do feel very lonely at times because, like I said, doing this was a big risk, but I'm glad I've done it. So thank you. So if anybody wants to ask any questions, feel free to, and I can get anybody to come in.
Could I say just one more thing? Mm-hmm. I also wanted to add the importance of having groups like CIT and partnerships with the community, because through the trainings that they're doing and partnering and getting resources and being able to share those resources with their police officers, they are really cutting back on recidivism. You have less people going to jail. You have more people being taken to facilities where they can get treatment, and as a wraparound kind of treatment where you check in to make sure they have the housing, food, medication, health, everything is being cared for to keep them from making the same mistakes, keep going out and getting arrested, that we're not filling up the jails anymore. We're actually getting people solid help. So again, training and resources, that is truly the key for an all-around better community, a safer exchange, and to get people the resources and the help that they need, rather than putting them in the jail where they're not getting what they have to have. So I just wanted to add that too.
Excellent. As I said, if anybody wants to ask any questions from the attendees, let us know, because I know that the panelists are here. I know some of them had to leave. Again, as I said, everybody that has joined us sort of, again, when they said they're going to be here just for their part and they will leave, some stayed. And I'm not surprised that we've run over time, because as I said, it was to make sure that we connect with our American counterparts, because that's where I got a lot of my help. But as I said, I'm in the UK and not in the USA, and I know that I've got to make sure that I'm supporting my UK connections. So anybody answer questions? No one's asking questions.
I'm putting some websites into the chat here that I referenced in my presentation, and have some more resources available if anybody's interested.
Okay. Anybody got any questions? I mean, as I said, Jesse, is there a question? I know Max is not here because I know Max had something to do. But would you like to answer Max's question, if you remember what it was? Audio. Your audio.
I think you may have to allow them to talk.
Yeah, his question was to do with does the media and the government have, or figures to do with more of the media, if the media has an equal amount of accountability as well when it comes to the Black community. Now, this is not really, obviously we don't live in an ideal world, but if I was to say that if some Black people worked on their image and stopped promoting criminality in some of their culture, and commit all the majority of the crime in certain areas, right, especially in London, the media wouldn't have anything to basically report on, right? Another thing as well is Black people need to start pushing their intellects, I've always spoken about intellects. This is the same thing that applies in America. Is if you look in America, obviously not all, most of the time in America, I have been in like YouTube live streams with certain American politicians or people like conservatives, like Annie Bryan Logan, if anyone knows who Annie Bryan Logan is. Also, I think a guy called Officer Brandon Tatum, right? But I know that there is certain representatives in the Black community in America. But what I also tend to see is in the Black community, not just in the UK, but somewhat in the US as well, is that the type of people that are representing us in certain things are not, let's say, accomplished or qualified to be representing us. And it sounds kind of cruel, but like what I really kind of see is there's a lot of rappers, athletes, you see comedians kind of supporting us, but where is the people that are actually specialists in that field that is actually promoted in the media, right? When I think of Black intellects in the UK that are well known, I could only think of two. And that is probably a barrister by the name of Sean Wallace from The Chase, and another individual by a guy called, I think he's to something to do with history, called Kenwin Andrews, right? So if I was to say if it's equally to do with the media, I would say, yes, the media has a part to play in it, but it's also for the Black community to start pushing more positive images around, because let's be real, where in America, not in America, but if you look in the UK, most of the stuff that is in the mainstream and that's promoted tends to be negativity, right? We can't deny this. Yes, there is some positive things that we see, but the negativity overrides the positivity, and that's not good for us, right? So that's really what I've got to say regarding the media. Like it is the media, but it's also on us too.
Okay, I noticed that when Jesse made a statement, and Jesse knows when I talk that this is his view. So I know a comment said that when he talks about Black people, I think that's his perspective, because I know over the last 6 years that I've known Jesse, even I can talk about myself, is where it has been a lot of lack of representation. It has been very one-sided. So where with me, things have changed for me, where it's for a good. But for Jesse, it's always been a lot of negativity when it comes to empty promises. And most of the time it has been from the Black community. So I think when you hear Jesse speak, and he did put a disclaimer out, is because of his own experiences. So yes, I know people may not agree with what he says, but like I've always turned around and said, yes, a lot of the media focuses on negative images of Black people, while it is about representation. But because of Black Lives Matter, we have seen a lot of things. They try to turn it around now. For some, that's what we have been seeing. But again, it is about us taking responsibility. It's about our program making. It's about the music. There's so many things. So like I said, I think just to let everybody know, Jesse made a disclaimer to say it's his view. Because again, if we had somebody who's racist, we can't change their views. And that's how they think. So for me, I have to respect what Jesse says.
Also, can I add something to that as well? Is I have done extensive research regarding crime statistics when it comes to stop and search and the areas in London by a race in various boroughs of London. I did this way back when I was actually doing a presentation at the UCL. So I'm not lying about this. This is why I said in certain areas and in London. I didn't say the whole of England. And I did make a disclaimer stating that this is not a generalization of Black people. I clearly said that in a disclaimer, right? So what I'm trying to say is we have to hold accountability on both sides. We have to look at both sides of the story and not always just say, oh, hey, we just be one-sided. You can be on one side and you can disagree with the other side. You don't have to have this black and white point of view.
Thank you. Joanna, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of just, funnily enough, building on what Jesse just said, really, in terms of that. I think this isn't about saying, oh, it's this view or it's that view, or not necessarily view, but, oh, it's because of this or it's because of that. I think it's about taking a much more kind of systemic view of what's going on and saying there are some areas where maybe, people need to be more accountable, the cultural elements, all the things that have been spoken about, and also accepting that the system inherently is skewed in a particular way that is challenging and makes it difficult and makes it easier, maybe, I would say, for people to defend what they're doing because the system isn't supportive anyway. So I don't think it's about kind of, one of the things that I think is that we as human beings, maybe, we always look for that definitive answer. And my own belief is that there isn't really a definitive answer. It's always contextualized, it's always dependent, it's always relative. So, I think I quite like what Mandy made a statement about us all being earthlings or something like that. And I think Brandon said something similar as well. And I just think that maybe what I think actually is that when we're looking for solutions, it's not about us scurrying into one corner or another corner. It's about saying what's going on in all the corners and how do we bring all of that together in kind of like a systemic way so that we have a perspective that reflects the reality as far as we can in all of its forms. That's what I think.
Good. We have an anonymous attendee saying, "Can I speak?" in the Q&A. Anonymous attendee saying, "Can I speak?"
That's the thing. We don't know who it is. So it's going to be very difficult if they've gone anonymous. I think that might have been an accident sharing. I mean, as I said, we never knew how this was going to turn out because I just keep getting negative comments about doing this event. Everybody thought it was about bashing the police. But, I mean, Paul had to go. And there was a statement that Paul made. And he basically said that, and I think Jessie may have said it, is that when a policeman goes to work and that child goes out, they all want to get home safe. But then at that moment in time, whatever happens, happens. And I think Tom, in the week on Sunday, because we were actually having little catch-ups before today, and Tom spoke about, I can see.
Oh, it was Liz who was the anonymous person.
I'll put you on. So basically, I think Tom came back and said that in America, it was about professionalism. Is it to do insurance? And I know they do have it over here in the UK, I was told by NPAA. But I mean, you can explain it a little bit if you wanted, Tom, and then we can go to Liz quickly, who wants to say something.
I'll briefly touch on it, and then we'll go to Liz. So basically, I think it was a therapist or some other professional here in the States that in order to keep incidents like the George Floyd murder from happening again or having systemic racism kind of be filtered out in a sense, and they have this in the UK, but not here in the US, where police officers purchase individual professional liability insurance policies. So this way, each officer is held accountable for his or her actions. And if there's more complaints or there's more incidents or there's more risk with this particular officer, his or her premiums will go up. And then it'll get to the point where the officer will decide, I'm not going to do this anymore and quit, go to another department or police station, what have you. And his or her problems will go with him or her. So that way the person will start to see that they keep job hopping. Maybe something's up with them. And also that department won't have to deal with that particular problem or person within that community. So professional liability insurance policies so individual officers get held accountable.
Okay, thank you. Maybe I could check it out again to make sure that we see that. Also, there's another one. You said it earlier because what happened was because you started a bit early. Because remember, we were going to get you in between, and things changed. We never expected that we were going to get the police officers and then NPPA because they only joined us yesterday. But it was meant to be 9:30. Everybody was meant to come on, but it shows that everybody came with different perspectives. Some people spoke a little bit longer because obviously I think people had a point, something to share. So just a question, I was just going to ask.
And then we'll get to Liz. I promise you, Liz, we'll get to you. Go ahead, Venessa.
The question I would like to ask, I think you said it again on Sunday, was I know because some people didn't get to hear it at the beginning, if your child has got a diagnosis, why is it important that you let them know instead of saying, I don't want them to know? That was one of the questions.
So, and I made this the key point to kick off my presentation today, is it really does start with what we think about ourselves and how we perceive our children, because parents, how you see your children will have a direct effect on how they see themselves. And if you withhold that diagnosis or you underestimate their capacity or ability to understand who they are, that's going to set the tone for the rest of their lives. Or you choose to wait to tell them until they're 18, and then they're like, wait a minute, you knew this from the time I was a kid and you didn't tell me then, but do you not love me? Do you not trust me? So it's a lot of underlying messages in telling them about their diagnosis so that they can understand themselves better, and by also having the family on a united front. So like when my mother understood my diagnosis and accepted it herself, she was ready to hit the ground running. She wouldn't take no for an answer. She wouldn't stop fighting until I got what I needed to succeed. And I see this and I'm like, wow, I'm worth fighting for. I'm going to fight for myself now. So parents, you have the potential to build that confidence in your children, but you have to let them have it, that confidence.
Thank you. I'm going to put you on to Liz, and I've got one more question I've got to ask.
Liz, you're on. You're around. I think allow her to talk. Here we go.
Come in. Just made her come in.
Liz, you're on.
Yeah, I had to unmute myself there. Right. Thank you for that. So what I really want to say is just thank you all of you for everything that you've brought over this, session. I'm sure you UK people are probably getting really tired now, but it's just been immense, and listening to different perspectives, but also hearing how they cross over and how there's similarities. But I also know we are all in different, we're in different countries and we're in different parts of the UK, and sometimes what we're up against is very different. And Jesse's contribution, I'm glad as a mother to an autistic child that he hasn't had a negative experience, because my fear is those negative experiences, which is what we're working on down where I live, because where I live, which is in a predominantly white area, Sussex, south coast of England, you are 13 times more likely to be fined, during COVID if you are a person of colour. You are 9 times more likely to be fined even as a resident. So being a seaside town, we have a lot of holidaymakers and London people that come down for the day, but I'm talking as a resident, you're still 9 times more likely to be fined, and you are 12 times more likely to be stopped and searched, 12 times more likely. And they are the police's own statistics. And, I think it's been really difficult during this time.
A little bit of an echo there.
Has it stopped? And it's been really difficult, especially when people have been trying to take aid. Many of our community members have been taking aid during COVID, and they are the ones that have been stopped and searched, trying to help other families. So again, it's another layer of trauma and triggering. And I do know there are mentors very similar to Paul who've actually experienced this in London too, and they have turned that into a learning opportunity. So they may have been handled aggressively. There may have been an excessive amount of police that stopped them when they were trying to, take families take food to Black families that had maybe suffered a bereavement during COVID. But rather than show that pain and trauma or be triggered, they used it as an example. They kept their calm, they kept their cool, and then at a later date they got the opportunity to then train those police officers, and they're upstanding mentors in that way. So there are positives to gain sometimes from these very, very difficult circumstances. And I also think, I also want to thank the police officers that were here that are not here anymore for their sort of inspiring injection into this conversation, and it does give us hope that there are, partnership will be the way forward, I think. And so I just want to thank you guys. It's been amazing, but I don't want to take up any more time because everyone must be tired. But
I'm very tired. But Jackie knows sometimes we're on like sometimes 2 o'clock in the morning.
Yes.
So again, that's what's the advantage. If you've got a parent out there, or even an autistic person that just needs someone to talk to, there's always my American connections that, pick up the phone and we're always talking and Skyping each other. So it makes a big difference. Thank you. Thank you, Liz.
And I see Mandy has her hand up. Mandy, if you want to say something.
Yeah, it was just on the back of what you said. My son's known that he's been autistic since the day he was diagnosed. So, and he was 2 at the time. Like I say, in this house we call it awesome. And he's just, as time's gone on, he sort of just adapted to it really easy and a lot easier, rather than me telling him now. It would be really difficult for him to sort of fit in. Whereas now he just fits in, he just slots in, he knows he's different. And I always say different, not less. So he knows he's different and he's just different, but we're all different. So, you know, I mean, I've been sunburnt, so I'm red like a beetroot. So, you know, we're all extremely different. And, you know, I'm happy that I told him at that age. And that was all I wanted to say.
Yes, sir. You know what I was just saying? Because I know sometimes people get offended when they always hear the word that we're all the same. But I get it and I understand because of where I've come from and where I've always positioned myself. Because I think if I keep on taking it and thinking that, because obviously every time when I was always going to places and I was the only black person, I just had to just reassess the situation and say, you know what, I'm not going to let it stop me from doing what I'm doing, because if not, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't be able to meet Tom, because Tom actually found me. And I didn't even realise who Tom was. And I did my research. I went, wow. So Tom and me have been following each other for a while. But when, as I said, COVID connected me to lots and lots of people, but I felt I needed for the community, the London community, the USA, for us to come together. Because as I said, when Floyd got killed, George Floyd, what it happened, a lot of confusion, a lot of autistic people that I know who are white, who were saying things not in any way. What was happening is they were told that they were being white supremacists. And then you had it the reverse, where I had the black autistic people being told that they were racist. And what it was is because they were autistic, they just saw things for the way it was and being very open. And I know it caused a lot of distress on Twitter and Facebook. So sometimes as parents or professionals, if an autistic person is saying so, and if that's how they've always been, and then all of a sudden, COVID, or I should say Black Lives Matter, you know, all what's gone on Twitter is caused a big stir. And it's like all of a sudden these autistic people have been attacked because they've spoken what they've always said. So for me, I'm always about peace, as Jackie's put. I'm all about solutions. It's about, you can't fix everything, but it is about talking. It is about communication. And those who want to move with me and Jessie, Jackie, Tom, Joanna, there's a whole load of us, you know, there's a lot of us that do things together. Can't go to the USA, but one thing I can do is I know that we can connect via Zoom or micro team, or whatever it is out there. But thanking everybody. If anybody got one more question, that's the question I want to ask you, Tom, because I know that, you know, this question was asked to you the other day. Because they always say it is about representation, but then if there's, like with me, what happened with me when I first started, I was people complained, why have you always got white speakers? Where are the black speakers? So I turn around and say, you get them, and then I'll bring them forward. But what has happened? Yes, there are a lot of speakers, but from your perspective, as a I would say white autistic person doing the training, because that was the question that was asked, is how do you engage with Afro-Americans? That's the word that's used, African-Americans?
We say African-Americans here in the States, or that's how I say it to be politically correct.
Yeah, so when you say African-Americans, is when it came to your training, because I knew about your Be Safe movie before I even knew it was you. I didn't even realize it was you when I was watching these videos. So how do you, when it comes to people in America, when it comes to your training, and, you know, does it work? Because some people think it's not, because obviously you're not going to understand about the culture.
So if I'm understanding your question correctly, I find that my mother and I got a lot of our clients, because we before COVID, we would go all around the United States putting on these events that introduce police to young people and make sure they both understand each other. We're finding that the best way to have the connection or have it be initiated is for someone high up in the police department, like the chief, the captain, the sheriff, someone who has someone with a disability in their family is one way to get a good foot in the door, because these higher ups want their family members treated well and willing discuss that amongst their subordinates. So when we find people that have some skin in the game, for lack of a better term, and that it makes it personal, it matters more to them when it's personal, that really gets the conversation going and allows them to be more open to a community event like that, if that helps.
Thank you. I mean, like I said, some people think that you're doing what you're doing, is it outreach into the community? And I believe it did, because I remembered when I saw your video, and I've got a habit, if I see something, I approach the person, because I worked in television. So that thing, if I want to know something, I Google search, I find the person, and that is how I found, well, you found me actually. And then you connect to say, look, hey, I want to do some presentations with you, but it's taken us years. But I think this was the right time, because between you and Jackie, two different perspectives, because like everybody keeps saying, the question was, is that if somebody's got a autistic young person who is nonverbal, who's unable to, who needs a carer. Again, we didn't talk about this about COVID. I know time is running out for us, but the question, because I think it needs to be said, if there's a carer out there who takes an autistic person to the shops and they look, in the words I'm doing in quotes, normal, right, and they say they can't go into the shopping centre or they've got to wear their masks and the person needs that carer, it's about educating the wider community that there are some autistic people that are taller than us that do have carers. And if they're non-verbal, and that's where Jackie came in. So Jackie's perspective is that her son needs his mother. Yes, Jackie? And then
Yes.
where Tom is the other perspective, where Tom has a mother that was able to engage. And then Tom explained, when we talk about social distancing, he used hula hoops in a way of space.
Right.
So again, when it comes to social distancing, again, we didn't touch that. Maybe we've got to do another thing now, away from this and talk about this. So when Tom spoke about social distancing, he used the hula hoop, something we can probably go back on, Tom, and just to show that when we talk about autism, we just can't keep talking about those who are mainstream. We've got to look at the other end who've got carers. And I think that's why I liked between you and Jackie, because you've got two different perspectives and you're able to speak from two different views, which people are not going to understand. I think that's why I picked the two of you.
And I wanted to also add another thing, which we also didn't touch on, but the care, if a person who's nonverbal and on the spectrum goes into the hospital, oftentimes carers don't go because they don't get paid, because they're told that the hospital bills first for that person, and that hospital bill would bump into the payment for that carer. So now they're finally saying that people that are nonverbal or people that need a carer in the hospital, that their carers can actually be there in the hospital with them. So they won't be there by themselves because they can't make those decisions and they can't really convey what they need without their carer.
Thank you. I've got one more question for all of us to leave on a good note, because everybody thought this was going to be doom and gloom. It's not. It's about solutions and moving forward. I know we're going to do part 2. But like I said, I'm going to take a bit of time out because I've been doing over 50 Zooms for the last 4 months. I need to break. So the question I'm going to ask every one of you before we leave is something positive to the listeners out there, because obviously it's going to be on the podcast. Just something positive. Over COVID has been, during COVID, before COVID, a lot of us still experience the same problems. During COVID, some of us, it was a bonus. It was a positive thing for us because our children were not getting stressed, overstressed, understressed, stressed out, anxiety, you name it. But then on the flip side of it, I believe that the government saved a lot of money. But then when now lockdown, we told that we can go back out, I've just been told now the new COVID law is we're not allowed to meet our families. So for an autistic person, the uncertainty, the frustration, the inconsistency of what needs to be done, they need to have more consideration when they're supporting the autistic community. So my question now, before we all go, each one of you, is a message to, I would say, those who are the decision makers, like the government in the USA or in the UK, how we can now make a difference, because you can't just say last week everybody's going out and now be told you can't go to your family.
Ladies first. I know what I want to say, but ladies first.
I do Joanna, and then Mandy, then Jackie. And then Riley if he wants to.
All right.
Joanna?
Go ahead, Joanna.
Hi. I guess fundamentally it's the way that people have come together. I think that it's kind of generically raised awareness for people, maybe reordered people's priorities. And it's meant, I think, that things like this have happened. So even if, obviously because of what happened with George Floyd happened during this time as well, I think if that had happened during another time, maybe it wouldn't have had such the impact that it's had. And I think that because we know it's not the first time, I'd like to think it would be the last, but it won't, it happens, it's happening. But I think that because it happened during COVID and everybody's eyes were not distracted by the norm, it's kind of, it's had such an impact. And I think that the response to that generally has been that people have come together and said, this has to stop. And, I think that we're in events like this. And I think that that's one of the positive things about COVID is it's kind of recentered people generally.
Thank you. I agree. Mandy?
How was it? A message to the government? Was it a message? You want to
say something they need to do, because everything seems you can't do this, you can't do that. If it's a neurotypical person, they sort of get it. But then when it comes to autistic community, especially as parents, if we know we've got teenagers that are undiagnosed, a lot of them are probably going to get caught up in some risky business because parents can't struggle. So like with me, if you say to your child, you can't go out, there's no such thing as COVID because they've seen it somewhere and they're not going to believe us. So the government needs to now take responsibility for what they put on the TV, what they say out there, because it's not helping us when we're trying to parent our young people and a lot of the autistic adults out there that do need their carers to be with them.
Well, I put think, be aware, be versatile and understand. That's what I would want from our government and what I would want people in general is especially the understand bit and being versatile as well. I mean, autism is versatile. It's, it's a spectrum condition. It's not, you've met one autistic person, you've not met a group of them. So, it's, I think it's a matter of understanding and being aware and being versatile. And then thinking, because they often don't.
Thank you. Jackie?
I guess what I want to do is still take it back to the community. I know that the government, they have their part, but the government will not be able to supply our needs if we don't tell them what we need. And sometimes we don't know what we need if we're not talking to each other and kind of having an idea of what kinds of things can be done or different methods to do things. I think there should be more mentorship between parents of autistic kids and autistic adults who are parents. I think there should be more mentorship between autistic teenagers and other autistic teenagers and kids. I think that we need to start talking more. We can oftentimes when I'm talking to parents, I had a parent call me one time. She has a teenage daughter, and the daughter was opposed to taking showers, and she couldn't understand why she was opposed to taking showers. And I explained to her that it was a sensory issue, and that if you let her turn the water on and allow her to stand somewhere in the shower where the water's not touching her, and let her control how much water touches her and when, that she will be more receptive to it, because it's an overload to stand there and have water just beating on your body and the sound of it raking off of the shower curtain and feeling it on your feet. It's just too much. So that's one example. But when it comes to things like COVID, if more parents were talking to more adult people who are on the autism spectrum, who were parents, and we could get together and say, what works? If your child, like my son is pretty much well adjusted, what do you do? What works? What kinds of things? Or if we could really get in there and talk to parents and really mentor them early on with the early intervention. If we could give treatments and ideas to parents who have kids who do or do not have an autism spectrum, if they have any traits, they deserve to have access to therapies that will help that child. You shouldn't have to wait till they have an autism diagnosis to be able to get appropriate help. So if we insist on having better help, and if we seek it out, and if we take the initiative to seek out people, talk to people, then we'll have a better outcome, because we'll always be in communication, and we can always kind of troubleshoot and say, if we don't know, we can put our heads together and say, what's the best way, get to know each other's kids, and how do we tackle these problems? And we wouldn't be sitting here on an island in the midst of nothingness. Isolation is the killer, really. We need to band together and stop being isolated. We can't do this alone. Where's the village? So we need to be the village.
Thank you, Jackie. Tom? I don't know if Bailey...
Did Mr. Riley want to say anything to close?
Then you can come and then we say goodbye. Riley, you there?
No, he left a while ago.
Okay, so Riley said...
So guys, camera on here. All right, so I'll say what I want to say here. Getting back to what I was mentioning earlier, I think people with disabilities they may not realize it, but instinctually, I think they have a slight advantage given this situation. And you're right, we do need to involve them in the conversation, hear from them, like, how'd you get this far for so long? Because if you think 4 months in lockdown or in isolation is tough, how about 4 decades? That's how the reality is for some of us. And I think we people with disabilities are stronger than we may think, or other people give us credit for. And it is the smartest and the strongest that are going to get through this pandemic. I don't say strong necessarily physically or smart as necessarily intellectually, but mentally and emotionally. When you're mentally and emotionally smart and strong, that's going to propel you forward. And you won't know how strong you are until you have no other option but to be strong.
Right.
And that goes for parents and caregivers too. And as for the government, I know, Venessa, you wanted me to say, what would I say to the higher ups? I believe I am living proof of what people can be if they are listened to, if they have support and services, if they are the drivers of change and are really making things happen in the world. And when there are governments that fall short or don't listen, I believe we, the people, will step up and succeed where that government is failing or has failed us.
One thing I can take away from all the presentations was that a lot of the families that I met, or the families that I knew at the face-to-face sessions, the conferences, the seminars I would do, I think this, they've said, is the best time they've learned a lot over the last 4 months. And what is taken away is that they said that I've actually given them hope. Because a lot of the professionals, a lot of family members would turn around and say, your child will become nothing. And then you've got the mother or the father or whoever who's got a family member who's been diagnosed later on in life to say, well, why do you want that diagnosis? Because you coped. But how do they know? So I just felt that this event, as I said to Jackie, it took a while to do. And I think we had to do it because there's so many mothers, so many fathers, asking questions, and nobody was wanting to talk about race. They didn't want to talk about being autistic because they were told that they're using it as an excuse. And the one thing I always learned, somebody said, there's a guy named Mark Brown, Special Help for Special Needs, has always helped me in the early days with my son. And his words were, autism is not an excuse for bad behavior, but if you do not teach that child anything, you're going to cause the problems. As parents, we do need to help our autistic child. And if we don't want to tell nobody, why? Because I've seen the damage that has happened to a lot of autistic people who end up down the wrong path. Like my youngest one, she went into a people referral unit. It's an alternative, like getting kicked out of school when, in year 6, she was about 11, 12. Once she turned into secondary school, older school, obviously in the USA, I would say once she got into secondary school, things went out pear-shaped. And now I'm struggling with a 14-year-old because she was late diagnosed, and I can see now why early intervention. No, I wouldn't say early intervention. Why having a diagnosis early does help, or changing the teaching strategies. Because if not, you're going to have a child. What my daughter used to tell me when she was younger: "Mum, I'm stupid. I'm mentally ill. I've been told I'm stupid and an idiot at school." Now, once she's diagnosed, I've seen the damage it's caused, because now I'm fighting a fight that I feel I need the voices of autistic women and autistic Black women as well, because the cultural elements sometimes get missed in our community because of cultural differences that gets overlooked. And again, as I said, everybody should be able to speak without feeling ashamed. If we say black, white, we should be able to say it, not think that we're being racist. And I think that's why I spoke to a police officer one time and they said to me that when they use the word black or white, it's like they've been told they're being racist. But how do you identify something if you're out somewhere? So, as I said, I'm thanking everybody for joining us. And as I said, you want to say one more word, Tom, and then we can go? Because like I said...
Can I just say one more thing, too?
Well, I'll just leave with really my final quote that I started with, that life doesn't come to you. It's up to you to come to life. Rather than wait for someone to help you, you be that help that you are seeking.
Yes.
Jackie, your turn.
Yeah, I had one thing. I also wanted to encourage parents to teach their children, starting early as you have to into adulthood, that help them to have the right to vote. I took the time to teach my son about the voting process. I took him with me to vote. He is a registered voter. He has a right to vote and have a say about who's making decisions on his behalf. And I think that a lot of times parents don't even see their children as capable of doing it. But my son takes his voting right very seriously, autism and all. So please, I encourage parents to include those processes in their ISPs, IEPs, work with the children, let them see the political talks, read information to them, show them how to do the voting process, take them to the polls, let them be able to share their voice and help make those decisions on who's making decisions on their behalf. And that's the last thing.
Thank you, everybody. We will join you again soon. I'm sure everybody on this panel, maybe we've got to do it. I don't know how we're going to do it because, as I said, USA, UK, California, it's all different. But yes, thank you, everybody.
Yes, thank you.
I'm not sure how many are left. There's only probably
10 attendees and us 6 panelists. The 16 people were like in the 30s earlier.
Keeping in contact with the Americans. Oh gosh! But thank you, everybody.
All right,
as I said,
thank you.
I did get a message from a specialist, and they turned around and said more definitely needs to be done. And from their perspective as a specialist, it's enlightened them as well. So yes, it shows that when we're talking like this and not blaming and getting angry and shouting, it shows we can get our message across. And thanking everybody. And yeah, we'll catch up soon. Yeah, right. Bye.
I look forward to future conversations.
I do too. Right. Bye.
Bye. Stay safe.